welcome! It's Mud Dog with the Texas Space Navy bringing you another Star Citizen video. And today's video is going to be a little bit more on the lore side. It's going to be a brief overview, and then I'll go into more specifics in future videos. Because I wanted to do a brief overview just because there's a lot to cover. I really need to get all the information I possibly can to do the subjects justice. So again, it'll be a very, very broad, brief overview of Texas lore, pretty much going up until, I guess, closer to modern times, maybe. So let's get started. So, Texas. What was here before anything else? So let me tell you, Texas was considered a very hellish place all the way up until probably the 1800s. It was a very rough place to live or to try to settle, and you had to be very rough and tumble to be able to make it happen. So a lot of rough and tumble individuals, a lot of frontiersmen, a lot of people that just had nothing left to lose were the ones that came to Texas. You had criminals, you had soldiers or former soldiers, you had, like I said, just people that had nothing to lose. It's a lot of the same people who settled in America first, as far as, you know, your Anglo-Saxon type settlers. It was people that were being persecuted, so they wanted to get away from that. They wanted some place that they could start their own family away from all the persecution. They could live on God's land, so to speak, and raise whatever farm or ranch or whatever it is that they wanted to do. So the original people who were here were, of course, the American Indians. And there were numerous tribes that called Texas home. You had the Karankawa, which were down closer to like Galveston and on the coast. These were very cannibalistic Indians. They were very much unfriendly, and there was a lot of people that lost their lives to the Karankawa when they landed ashore. They were not really scared of the white European man. They definitely pretty much enjoyed dining on them every chance they got. So they were not very friendly Indians, but they did not make it very long after white men started settling in to present-day Texas, or geographically Texas. There was also the Quitecan Indians, who used to have a delicacy. Their favorite meal were beans and dirt. You heard that right, dirt. They also would have a rotten fish that would like sit out on a rock for like 3 or 4 days, and that would be considered done for them, and they would eat it. So they were a very interesting group of Native American Indians. I got to, I guess, study some of this when I was in college, and very interesting groups. Hopefully I'll be able to bring you even more details on some of these Native Americans that settled in Texas before the white men started showing up and everybody else. Other groups, you had the Umano, who were out in West Texas. They were discovered by Spaniards as they were trekking across Texas trying to find gold and the lost cities of gold. Umano were actually one of the groups that talked about the lost cities, the 7 cities of gold that got the Spaniards so in a rye looking for it all over the Southwest. But you also had the Caddo Indians, which are mostly in East Texas, or were in East Texas. They were mound builders. They were very much from the Mississippian, I guess you want to call them Minoan, not really Minoan, but they were Mississippian culture Indians, so they believed in building mounds and stuff like that. They were mostly they were more of a peaceful kind of Native American Indian group, where they actually originated the word Texas, or it was Tejas, Tejas, and it means friends. They originated that word, and they were, like I said, very peaceful when it comes to Native American tribes because they traded with everybody. They traded with the Umano. They traded with, people as far, east as Florida. They pretty much, their goods went everywhere, and they got goods and traded it everywhere else. They were very good at communicating with other tribes of Native Americans and being able to trade with them. A lot of Indian tribes could not do that successfully, at least not like the Caddos did. The Caddos were very good as well as farming. They were mostly a static tribe, whereas a lot of the tribes would move around following herds of, buffalo or whatever animals they were hunting, cattle, whatever it is that they were hunting, mostly buffalo in North America. Which leads me to two of the more aggressive tribes that were out there as well, and that's the Apaches and the Comanches. So I don't know if you've heard of either one of those. A lot of you probably have. The Apaches are pretty crazy. They're pretty nuts. At least historically, they were considered pretty nuts. Apaches now, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know any Apache-blooded folks. Actually, I may have Apache blood in me, but I don't know. I may have Comanche. I definitely have Cherokee. The Cherokee were in Texas way late in their tribal history, when they'd already been subjugated by the U.S. government and relocated. But that's a whole nother story. So let's talk about the Comanche. The Apaches and the Comanches would sometimes get along, but the Comanche, one of these days I'm going to go into real depth history of the Comanche because they are some of the most interesting Native American groups out there. All of them are interesting if you ask me. But the Comanche, they hunted buffalo. That was their main thing. They hunted from all the way up in the northwest of the United States and all the way down into Mexico, because the buffaloes would roam the plains of North America throughout that entire region. Now, they did not become a prominent tribe until Europeans brought horses to North America. Comanches, for some reason, when they took their first horse from the Europeans, or when they found their first horse, that became a staple of their society. You learned how to ride a horse from, it's like from when you can walk, more or less. They did everything on horseback. Comanches were so proficient on horses that it made many Texans, when Texans started settling here, admire their ability on a horse. Comanches were the original horse riders, the original, I guess, horse army of Texas. I mean, if you wanted to look at the Mongols, they did a lot with horses. Well, the Comanche did as well. The Comanche were fearsome warriors on horseback. And Comanches had war tribes or war parties that would track their prey thousands of miles. They'd go all the way to California. They'd go all the way down to Honduras or Guatemala to track somebody or a group that they wanted to take out. They were very fierce. They were very deadly. And there's a lot of stories based off of Comanches versus Texans, versus Texas Rangers specifically. There's a lot of different stories out there, and I would love to bring you more of those as we get into some of these stories more in depth. So that covers a few of the tribes that were present in what's now present-day Texas. And that was the first settlers of Texas, were those Native Americans. We didn't get white folk or any other folk in Texas borders until, well, technically they came in 1519. We will go into more depth, hopefully, on some of the Spanish explorers and stuff, but the first Spanish explorers got here in 1519. So you think about it. Christopher Columbus discovered North America, so to speak, in 1492, which started bringing over tons of other people to look. So it was only, 25 years-ish later that we have an explorer actually discovering the Texas coast. And then actually people started exploring further inland on Texas. So very interesting to see how things played out with the early Native Americans and then the Europeans starting to come over. Spanish, of course, claimed all of North America if they got a chance, but most of North America, when they discovered it. So you had all these conquistadors, all these Spanish explorers exploring everything there was North America. But there wouldn't be people actually settling here for quite some time. They did set up missions. Missions were set up here and there, But Texas is such a large place, they couldn't just set them up everywhere. So you had a mission here and a mission there just to try to convert the Native American Indian tribes over to Christianity and to grow Christianity in North America. One of the bigger missions was set up in the Nacogdoches area with the Caddo Indians, and it failed, I think, something like 3 times. So that should tell you how harsh or how hard it was of a place for anybody to live in Texas. The Spanish, with all their might, all their money, all their know-how, all their prowess, they failed multiple times in Texas. It wouldn't be until Stephen F. Austin and Moses Austin, which is his dad, came along and decided to put a bunch of colonies in Texas. They got land grants from the Spanish government and later on even the Mexican government, which actually shut down some of those land grants. But again, that's another story for another time. But they got all these land grants to bring over, 200 or 300 families, and these families would settle all across, the middle part of the state along the Brazos River and certain areas in there as well. And they got these huge parcels of land that they could do whatever they wanted to on there, more or less. So a lot of them were coming from Ireland, from Germany, from the United States, from England. I mean, from everywhere, these people were coming over to make a new life. And especially it was people that might have been persecuted or people running from debts. There could be any number of different, types of people that were coming over, but they were coming to make a new start in Texas. These families had a very strong desire to have freedom. Now, they wanted to live under Spanish law, but they definitely they had that strong desire of freedom. And most of the families were American, so they already had a taste of that freedom from years and years under the colonies and then American system. So that's deeply ingrained in these folks. They want to live life the way they want to live it and not let anybody else take that from them. And that will lead into, I guess you could say, some butting heads with Spanish authorities or Mexican authorities, mostly Mexican authorities, because Mexico will overthrow Spain and claim all of the North American Spanish territories as their own. And that included Texas. So when they did that, Texas fell under Mexican authority. Mexican authorities in Mexico City wanted to crack the whip, so to speak, on all these darn Anglos, these Americans coming in, moving in, and changing the way that things are done, more or less. So they put a stop to that, and then they started, taking away rights. They started taxing, doing things that were really affecting the Americans that lived here. This led to some other issues, and some battles broke out, and eventually the Texas Revolution would occur. There were, of course, some infamous incidents in the Texas Revolution, which I will go over in much more detail in a later video. One you could say was the Alamo, of course. Everybody knows about the Alamo. 187 men losing their lives after holding strong for 13 days in an old church. More or less, that's the story, but there's a lot more to it. Then there's also Goliad, 400 men and women murdered. They surrendered peacefully to Mexican soldiers, and they were all executed. You don't hear a lot about that in the history books or the stories because it doesn't make a great movie. It doesn't make a great book. I mean, it is what it is. It's genocide. Then you also have, of course, the Battle of San Jacinto, which is the infamous battle where Texas won its independence from Mexico. Very interesting battle. It only lasted, I think, 30 minutes or 18 minutes, something silly like that. The main part of the battle anyways. And Texas really put it on the Mexican army that day. So we'll go into more details on those types of things. Once Texas won its independence from Mexico and declared itself a nation, it became a nation in 1836 and was a nation all the way through 1845 when it was annexed into the United States. It brought in a bunch of extra territory that you don't see on the maps today for Texas. So Texas was actually much bigger than it is today. We'll get into that as well. Hopefully I can bring some pictures into play for you guys to see. Right now, I'm doing the best I can with what I have. So let's end it right there. We'll go into the more modern times in a future video, but I do want to touch on these subjects that we've already talked about in more detail. Let me know in the comments down below if you're interested in seeing some of those details or hearing about those details. Which story do you think is going to stick out most to you? Which one did you want to hear the most about? I'm just touching the surface, just scratching the surface. There's so much more I can bring you on these topics. I need to get a video out to you guys, and I wanted to just kind of briefly scratch the surface and give you a broad overview of the early days of Texas history. So again, let me know in the comments down below what you're most interested in seeing. Hit that like button if you like this video, hit that subscribe button, and let me know what you like or dislike about this video. Hopefully there's going to be more likes than there are dislikes, and I'll bring you hopefully an improved lore video coming up soon. I'm Mud Dog with the Texas Space Navy, and I'll see you out in the verse.